Everyone. I can't see each and every one of you all, but it's more important that you all are able to see and hear this lecture. So if you carefully analyze the world today, the world is in a constant flux of change. You find that in the past, the world has been changing. Today, the world is changing, and in the future, the world will continue to change. The day changes from morning to afternoon to evening to night. The seasons change from spring to summer to autumn to winter. And we have seen that attitudes change, even statues are changing. So in the last few months, there's been a seismic change. There's been a tremendous change. In fact, there's been a paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift has shaken everyone. So all the plans that people have done, all those plans have been thrown out of the window, and everyone has to reassess their entire lives. Robert Burns, the Scottish poet, cautions us. He says, "The best laid plans of mice and men gang after gley." In his Scottish dialect, Robert Burns says, you can see it up on the screen, "The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley." Gang after gley means it can go awry. It will not work. It may not work. So you may have certain plans, but there's no guarantee that it will work. Nature may have its own plans. So you've got to understand and adjust yourself to this life. So what have we learned in the past few months, apart from the dodgy haircuts and the phenomena of TikTok videos? That's why we have not kept the camera too close. So what have we learned in the past few months is that if you don't make the effort to think for yourselves, nature will force you to think. If you don't think about yourself and your life, the way you're dealing with the environment, with animals, with everyone else, nature forces us to think. So now in this uncertain and ever-changing world, how can we keep ourselves motivated? How to avoid stress and strain, worries and anxieties, and keep the mind positive and peaceful? That's the topic of this lecture. As human beings, you find that human beings are motivated to seek happiness. Each and every one of us, not only here in any part of the world, what are we all seeking? We want more and more happiness. Happiness is our birthright. It's a universal goal. One person chooses to go to work for happiness. Another person avoids work to get happiness. One person terrorizes the world to find happiness. Another person protects the world to find happiness. So whatever we do in life, we are all doing whatever we're doing in order to get happiness. But the question is, how many of us can claim to be truly happy? And if you look at the world, you'll find that if you ask anyone, you ask your own friends, your family, they will say, if you ask them, are you happy? They'll say, yes. In England, they say, not bad. I'm all right. So everyone says, I'm all right. And then if you push them further and say, really, are you really happy? I'm happy, but there's always a but. But I got my daughter's wedding. But I've got this. I've got that. My hair is falling. Each one has got their own problems. And they believe if that problem is sorted out, they'll be complete. But no one has found completion that way. Everyone is looking for that elusive happiness. So what is happening is that our happiness is constantly being interrupted by sorrow. You are happy. It's not that people are miserable, but general happiness It's constantly being interrupted by sorrows. You know, when you watch television programs in certain channels, it gets interrupted by ads. Similarly, your happiness is getting interrupted by sorrow. And that's why you watch BBC, because in BBC there's no ads. You watch the program continuously. So your happiness in life should be like BBC. It should be continuous. Continuous bliss. So now you find that soon there will be a vaccine for this virus. And then probably there'll be another virus, there'll be a vaccine. There have been so many vaccines for these viruses in the past. So there's going to be a vaccine, and that will solve the problem of the virus. But where is the vaccine to solve stress and strain? Where is the vaccine to solve worries and anxieties? Where is the vaccine for mental health? So where is this mental vaccine? Don't worry. This mental vaccine has already been discovered, and it was discovered 10,000 years back by great thinkers. And they call this mental vaccine as Vedanta. So Vedanta is just knowledge of life and living. It's a technology of living which prepares you to meet the challenges in life. Vedanta provides mental immunity against the changes and challenges of the world. See, the difference between a pessimist and a philosopher is that a pessimist is one who expects eventualities, whereas a philosopher is one who's prepared for eventualities. You ought not to be pessimistic. You ought not to expect wrong things, but you should be prepared in case something goes wrong. Swamiji, under whose guidance I had the privilege of learning Vedanta, he puts it across very powerfully. And Swamiji says, give your personality a lift, you then lift the whole world. So how do you manage to deal with the world? You see there on the screen. Give your personality a lift. You lift yourself, you lift the whole world. So two things Vedanta helps us with. The first thing Vedanta helps us is to find out who you are. Who am I? What am I made up of? What is the constitution of a human personality? That's the first thing. The second thing is how to relate to the world properly. So our personality is like an iceberg. I don't mean you're cold. So you see yourself in the mirror. When you see yourself in the mirror, what you see is only the tip of the iceberg, which is the physical personality, the outer personality. But what is beneath that outer personality is 90% of the iceberg, which is the inner personality constituted of the mind and intellect. So as human beings, we are made up of the outer personality, which is the physical body you see there, and the inner personality, which consists of the mind and intellect. The mind and intellect is like the software which runs the hardware of the physical body. Mind and intellect is like the engine which runs the vehicle. The quality of the vehicle is dependent on the quality of the engine. Similarly, friends, your quality and my quality is dependent on our mind and intellects. So these two equipments are governing our actions, are governing our lives. So the next question is, what is this mind? What is this intellect? The mind is an equipment in us which has feelings, emotions, likes and dislikes, and desires. And different from the mind is the intellect, which thinks, reasons, decides, and judges. Whether you're American, whether you're Chinese, whether you're Japanese or Indian or English, it doesn't matter. Everyone has got a mind and intellect. So these two equipments are driving the body from action to action. Now, all the problems we get into in life is because of the mind. You need to use the intellect to control the mind. It's the mind that asks for the extra slice of cake. Intellect says, no, it's not right for you. The mind says, no, 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 I love it, I want that extra slice. So the mind in us has these likes and dislikes. It has these desires. Today, the mind says, I want to go and hug everyone. Oh, I'm missing people. I want to go and hug. I want to go and hug. Intellect says, no, you got to wait. Wait a little longer. No, 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 no. I'm dying to hug. Intellect says, yes, that what will happen if you hug. Wait a little longer. Then you'll be all right. So the mind in us is like a child. Intellect is the adult which controls the child, which manages the child. The mind can ask for anything. The mind has no reason. It's the intellect which has to govern the personality. So if the intellect governs the personality, then your actions will be perfect. So in today's world, the social media encourages the mind. It encourages you to be impulsive. And so many of these politicians and celebrities have got into problems because of social media. It's just the impulsive nature. You say something and then you regret, why did I say that? So the carpenter's rule, the rule of a carpenter is measure twice, cut once. Measure twice, cut once. Think twice before you act. Don't act straight away. Think carefully. And once you're clear it's the right course of action, then perform the action. Similarly, Shakespeare says, give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice, meaning listen to everyone, but speak to few people. And there you'll see it on the screen, the famous lines of Shakespeare in his play Hamlet. And that's the reason why we are given 2 ears and 1 mouth. But we are experts, we override that. So if your intellect does not control the mind, if the mind takes over the personality, then you get into stress. So stress destroys your motivation. And why is it that you're getting stressed? Is because the mind overpowers the intellect. Everyone wrongly believes it is the world that is causing stress. If I ask you all, which I'm not going to ask because I know you all can't reply, what is causing your stress? You will say, oh, it's my children. And now people have been calling and saying, you know what, you're talking about that. You manage my children at home, homeschooling. But people are doing homeschooling. Then you will say, where is stress? Now, whether you're doing homeschooling or not, stress is not in the world. It's not out there. It's within you. Interestingly, even this virus, it's not the virus which is causing stress. You know why? Because 1 year back or 2 years back, this virus was there in other species. It didn't cause us stress then. But now why are we stressed? Because we are attached to our lives. We are attached to our loved ones. We are attached to our money. This virus is going to take all of that away. That's why you have stressed about the virus. It's your attachment. It's the worries and anxieties that is causing stress, not the actual virus. You know, some of them, they go and do surfing on the beaches, on the seas. And when they go for surfing, the best of surfers, they look for the highest waves and they go and surf. They want high waves. But if you're not used to surfing, it is stress to go and surf. The thought of surfing is stressful. But if you know how to relate, it becomes a joy. You know, since I'm in England, I have to talk about the weather. You know, I come from South India, and when I first came to England, in South India, everyone complains about the weather. It's hot and hot. Because in South India, in Chennai, we only have 3 types: summer, summerer, summerist. And everyone says, we don't want this heat, we don't want the summer. So when I came to England, I was so looking forward to the cold. But when I came here, everybody is saying, we want heat, we want summer, we want hot. I say, what's happening here? One part of the world, they hate heat. Another part of the world, they love the sun. Therefore, it is not the sun that is causing stress. It is how you relate to it. That's the first lesson I learned when I came to England. It's not the external world that is causing stress. It's how you relate. So we have set up all these things on Zoom. Now I could be stressed. What if this whole thing crashes? Because I don't have any technical assistance here. My team has fixed all this remotely. There's nobody here. If it crashes, it crashes. Now what can we do? So as long as you have the right assessment, there's no stress. So stress happens because of wrong expectation. So you have the right assessment. This is what I can expect. Then you will be all right. So what is stress? Stress is defined as mental agitations caused due to unfulfilled desires. You see that the definition of stress: mental agitations caused due to unfulfilled desires. So it is those mental agitations that are creating the stress. So stress is internal, not external. Work cannot cause stress. It is the worries and anxieties that causes stress. When Harry Kane goes into play, if his mind is anxious about the result, then he will get stressed. It is not the game of football that causes stress, but his worries and anxieties that causes. For those who have been following tennis, Serena Williams has got one more Grand Slam title to equal Margaret Court's all-time record of 24 Grand Slams. She's got 23. And for the last few tournaments, she gets stressed. I got to win this one. I got to win one more. I got to win one more. And the more she's anxious, the less she will achieve it. You got to drop that anxiety and just play the game. She's got the best game. She can win it. It is the worries and anxieties that causes stress. So at work, you should have a spirit of vacation in your vocation. Develop a spirit of vacation in your vocation. Swami Ramatirtha, one of the greatest saints, makes the statement. If there's one thing you want to take from this lecture, please take this statement of Swami Ramatirtha. And he says, intense work is rest. See there. Intense work is rest. What gives you peace, what gives you rest is intense work. And what are we all doing? We want to get away from work. Look at absurdity. So friends, you see this paradox in life. You see a person who is 94, who is well motivated, like the Queen. She is so motivated and so active at 94. You see Sir Captain Tom Moore at 99, he's raised really nearly 28 million pounds for NHS. So you see people who are older, very motivated. On the other hand, you see some youngsters, 16-year-olds or 30-year-olds who are depressed. So motivation has nothing to do with age. Motivation has nothing to do with your stage in life. It has nothing to do with circumstance or community. So the question is, where does motivation come from? True motivation comes from within. So when you are motivated internally, then that is true motivation. Self-management is self-motivation. You see it up there. So what is self-management? Self-management is the intellect managing the mind. You manage your inner personality, you manage yourself, you will be able to motivate yourself. When we used to go on flights, the safety drill, what was the safety drill all about? It said, wear your own mask before you wear the mask for your child. That is self-management. You got to manage yourself before you can manage your work, before you can manage your family, before you can manage anything else. But the problem is we are dependent upon the external world. Our joys and sorrows are dependent on the external world. If someone wishes you on your birthday, you're happy. If someone does not wish you on your birthday, you're depressed. If you go on a holiday, you're happy. If you're on holiday, you're not able to go, you're depressed. So our joys and sorrows are fluctuating depending upon the world. At one point you're elated, another point you're deflated. This is not the life of a human being. It's only a human being who can be independent of the world. All other creatures are dependent on the world. They have no choice. But a human being alone can be independent. The question is, are we living up to the dignity and prestige of a human being? So people ask, what about in lockdown? How can I be motivated in lockdown? Why not? Lockdown is only restricting your physical actions. It's not restricting your mind. It's not restricting your intellect. So even in lockdown, you can be motivated. You can be happy. You can be active. Richard Lovelace, the 17th century English poet, says, stone walls do not make a prison, nor iron bars a cage. See it up there. Famous words of Richard Lovelace. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Stone walls can only restrict your body. It can't restrict the mind. Iron bars can only restrict the body, not the mind. So motivation has nothing to do with external factors. It's to do with your inner personality. And that is perfection in a human being. So perfection in a human being is that you're not dependent upon the external world and you find summer in your soul. You find joy, peace, and happiness within. In Swamiji's book, Vedanta Treatise, he quotes Oliver Wendell Holmes. And Oliver Wendell Holmes says, for him, meaning for that perfect person, for him in vain the envious seasons roll, who bears eternal summer in his soul. You see there. For him in vain the envious seasons roll, who bears eternal summer in his soul. So if you find summer within, obviously he's talking about England, you find that joy within, you find that peace within, you're not dependent upon the external world. So that is motivation, is that it is internal. So how to motivate yourself? what can we do to motivate ourselves? The word motivate means to provide with a motive. The dictionary meaning of the word motivate means to provide with a motive. So what is motivation? Where does motivation come from? It comes from an ideal that you fix for yourself. When you fix an ideal in life, there is a purpose, and that purpose motivates you. When there's no purpose, when there's no goal, when there's no ideal in life, you feel deflated. You feel bored, you feel depressed. And thanks to this pandemic, you find that there's a tremendous community spirit in all parts of the world. You find that people, though they have to be apart, they've actually come together. For the first time, we know who our neighbors are. We know who are the elderly people in our streets. We didn't know that before. Why? Because now there's an ideal, there's a purpose. Scientists are cooperating all over the world to find the vaccine. It's never happened before. In the UK, one of the businesses which is most competitive is the supermarkets. And for the very first time in British business, the supermarkets have come together to cooperate. So what has brought about this cooperation, this community spirit? Because there's an ideal. So what are we going to do after this pandemic? Are we all going to start fighting with each other again? So we need to fix an ideal, a common ideal, which will keep us together all the time. So when you have the ideal, you have an attitude of duties. Duties motivates you. Rights does not motivate you. So the difference is to have the attitude of duties, not rights. What can I do for others? So if the husband thinks in terms of what can I do for my wife, the wife thinks in terms of what can I do for my husband, there'll be a harmonious relationship. But if the partner thinks in terms of what can I take from the other person, this is my right, there'll be friction. The government thinks in terms of duties towards citizens, citizen terms of duties to the government, there's harmony. So any unit, when it thinks in terms of duties, there's harmony. When it thinks in terms of rights, there's conflict. Charles Dickens writes one of the most famous novels in English literature called A Tale of Two Cities. And in that, he describes a person, the central character, called Sidney Carton. And Sidney Carton, in the first half of the book, is not happy, is deflated. In fact, he looks at the mirror and he tells himself, I don't love you, nobody loves you. He has no ideal, he has no purpose. So he spends his times in the pubs. He keeps drinking all the time because he has nothing else to do. He feels so sad, he feels so sorrowful. But in the latter part of the book, his mood changes completely. He's very dynamic, he's very active. Why? Because he finds a purpose. And the purpose is to save an innocent man. Charles Darnay is convicted and he's going to be guillotined. And he hears about that. And he knows Charles Darnay is innocent. So he says, let me save his life. And he doesn't tell anyone. No one knows what he does. So what he does is he goes to France when there is a war going on. And he goes into the prison. He finds his way because he's got an intellect. He knows how to do it. He goes into the prison. He goes to the prisoner whom he wants to rescue. And the prisoner is surprised. He says, what are you doing here? He says, never mind. I'm your lawyer. I just want you to write a letter. So the prisoner is writing the letter. At that time, he gives him smelling salts and the prisoner faints. So Sidney Carton changes the clothes. He takes the clothes of the prisoner, puts his clothes on the prisoner, and pushes him aside and says, "Hey, guard, the prisoner has fainted. The visitor has fainted. Please take him." And the guards don't know. So they take the prisoner. They think it's a visitor and they take him out. And Sidney Carton is in the prison. Nobody knows what he's done. But he set everything. So he goes out, he's got his passport, and off he's gone out of France to safety. And now, next day, Sidney Carton is going to be guillotined. And he goes up to be guillotined. And as he's going up to be guillotined, he's the only person who's smiling. And at that time is one of the most memorable lines which is said in English literature. And Sidney Carton is telling himself with a smile, "It's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done before. It's a far, far greater rest I go to than I've ever had." He says, "I've never been joyous before in life." Actually, he's going to be killed. He's going to be guillotined. You see that? The famous last lines of The Tale of Two Cities. "It's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done. It's a far, far better rest I go to than I've ever known." And that is the joy, that is the cheer you get out of having an ideal. When you are unselfish, when you're doing something for others, you feel like this. So that joy, that cheer. So there are two things which will happen when you fix an ideal. First thing is you will become more active, more energetic, more dynamic. And the second thing is there'll be cheer, there'll be joy. So the ideal makes you more productive. You find in the city, you hear that they have burnouts. People burn out, the executives. So why do you get fatigued? Why do you get burnout? Because of self-centeredness, selfishness. No unselfish person will get burnt out. No unselfish person will be fatigued. Do you realize that animals don't retire? A tiger, if he needs food, even at an old age, the tiger has to hunt and find its food. That's why you find animals are so dynamic, so energetic, right through their life. See, the Vedanta team, me and my colleagues all over the world, when this virus broke out, we all spoke among ourselves and said, what's going to happen? So then we decided that this is a good opportunity for us to reach thousands more people, hundreds more people. So that invigorated us when we identified with that ideal. So in lockdown, we are all busier with these classes, with these lectures. So you become more dynamic if you identify with an ideal. And secondly, you'll be happier, you'll be cheerful. You'll have fun, you'll enjoy life. Why do people feel lonely? Not because of lack of company, but lack of purpose. You see there, Maldonado has said, loneliness is not lack of company. Loneliness is lack of purpose. So just to get people together doesn't make you good, but are you unselfish? Do you have an ideal? So higher the ideal, greater the motivation. So you're able to identify with the community, you step it up to the country, you step it up to the whole world, you become more and more motivated. You derive the power from that ideal. You know, the union leader who's just an ordinary worker, but the moment he becomes a union leader, he walks into the chairman's office. Without an appointment, he goes into the chairman's office. How is it? Because he's identified with the ideal of all the workers. When he's identified with that ideal, it gives him that power. An ambassador of a country. An ambassador of a country is so powerful. Why? because he's identified with his country. So you identify with a higher ideal, you derive the power from that ideal. So this is the secret to motivation. Fix an ideal, fix a goal, a purpose in life. Now this will take some time. So there are some practical tips I can give you all to implement certain aspects in your life so that you can feel motivated in your day-to-day life. And the first thing to consider is if you're indulgent in the senses. Every one of us want to see good things, we want to taste good things, but if you're not careful and if you indulge in the sense objects, indulgence takes away your motivation. And that's what you find, especially with children in the Western world and children in wealthy families in any part of the world. They get bored very easily. Why do they get bored very easily? Because things are available to them very easily. So when you indulge, when you contact too much, you lose the pleasure. So where does motivation come from? It comes from discipline. It comes from self-control. It may seem paradoxical, but it's true. When you're disciplined, when you're self-controlled, you feel motivated. So what is discipline? What is self-control? It is to regulate your contacts. Self-control does not mean avoiding contact. It just means regulating your contacts perfectly. It's interesting. Strawberries are in season now. After a month or so, it'll be out of season. So if you love strawberries, it's given to you now, and then you'll have to wait for a year until the next season comes. Mango season comes once, and then you have to wait for a whole year to get the next season. So nature regulates it for us because nature knows that we can't regulate for ourselves. So nature gives fruits and vegetables in seasons so that it's regulated. So the same principle you've got to adopt in life. Regulate your sense contacts to keep the joy, keep the cheer going. Secondly, the business community especially suffers from this scourge of incentives. So the whole of the business community today is suffering because of incentives. And it is this incentive, these bonuses, which cause the financial crash. Because of them, we all have to suffer. So incentives destroys productivity. Opposite of incentive is to have an initiative. When you develop an initiative, you're fired up, you're dynamic, you're productive. So what is initiative? Initiative is to fix an ideal. Let me work for my organization. Let me work for this community. When you fix an ideal, then you have an initiative to act. Initiative energizes you. Without an initiative, you look for rewards. Am I getting a reward? If you get a reward, only then you can do it. If you get no reward, you're gone. That is a problem with incentive. William Wordsworth, the great English poet, he was offered to become the poet laureate when he was alive. He was offered, he declined it. He said, I don't want the poet laureate. I'm happy to write poetry. I don't need any titles. Because I don't know if you all know, the poet laureate has to compose poems for the monarch. He said, I don't want to compose poet for the monarch. I want to compose for nature. So Wordsworth was forced to become the poet laureate. They said, listen, you can become the poet laureate and not compose for the monarch. He was the only poet laureate to get that privilege. because he didn't want to do it. So those brilliant poets, the brilliant writers and philosophers, they just presented these values. They didn't look for rewards. And thanks to their initiative, we are learning, we are enjoying in life. Then the third aspect to consider is to have objectivity in your relationship, not to fall into attachment. Attachment destroys motivation. Objectivity will keep your motivation alive. So attachment is love plus selfishness. If the parents are attached to the child, attachment causes sorrow. Attachment causes misery. Whereas if the parents are objective, then they'll be all right. It'll be a beautiful relationship. See, as a human being, we can feel anything. We can have emotions, but a human being should not become emotional. And that only a human being can do that. Animals, they become emotional. They're affected by emotions. A human being is one who has to feel the emotions and not be affected by it. How many emojis do you send? That shows how emotional you are. How many hearts? There are people who send 20 hearts in one message. So that shows your emotional nature. Now that does not mean you don't send emojis. I'm only saying when you're getting carried away by the emotions, you'll get affected by the emotions. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the great scripture, he says in one of the verses in the Bhagavad Gita that how should you act in this world? You should act like a lotus leaf in water. Padma Patra Vivambasa. Like a lotus leaf in water. A lotus leaf is born in water, lives in water, dies in water, but is not stained by water. How about that? Similarly, we are born in this world, we are living in this world, we'll die one day, but you've got to maintain that objectivity, not get affected by the changes. So these three aspects you can all consider to be disciplined and not indulge, to have an initiative and not be dependent on incentives. And thirdly, to maintain objectivity and not become emotional, become attached. So to implement all these things, we need an intellect. The most important equipment we have as a human being is an intellect, which no other creatures have it. In fact, that's what makes a human being superior to all creatures, is this equipment of the intellect. You see the absurdity when you go to zoos or circuses. You see powerful animals like tigers and lions, like elephants, being controlled by one 5-foot person. A 5-foot guy is standing with one stick and he orders a tiger and the tiger jumps. What is the strength of the tiger? What is the strength of that elephant? And yet one guy with a stick is able to control it. How is it? Because of intellect. So the human being is superior to all other creatures because of the intellect. The question is, are we using our intellect? So there is a difference between intelligence and intellect. I'll define for you all what is this difference. Intelligence, when we use the word intelligence, what we are talking about is knowledge that you're gaining from an external source. So you get intelligence from books, from teachers, from schools and universities. You're getting intelligence from this lecture. So intelligence is knowledge which you get from an external source. Whereas intellect is the capacity to think, to reason. A person may have intelligence, but not have an intellect. You see there, intelligence is not intellect. You could have studied in the best schools and universities. It doesn't mean that you have an intellect. You may not have an intellect. In this pandemic in the UK, there was a committee of scientists which gave advice to the UK government for the lockdown rules. They were called as a SAGE, a committee of scientists who gave the advice. The chief scientist in that committee was not able to follow the rules and he had to resign. The rules which he set for all of us to follow, he is not able to follow. That is the difference. He's very intelligent, but doesn't have an intellect to control his own mind. Djokovic, one of the leading tennis players in the world today, was under fierce criticism because he was not following the rules and he had to apologize. The health secretary in England did not follow the social distancing and he had to apologize. And when they asked him, why didn't you follow it? Because you're the one who set it. He said, after all, I'm a human. Today, to be a human means not to use the intellect. And that's what is the challenge we are all up against. So you've got to think carefully. So what is to drive your life? What is it you want to drive your life? Is it your mind or your intellect? No, that does not mean that you don't have any desires. That does not mean you should not have likes and dislikes. That does not mean you should not have passions. But your desires, your passions should be controlled with intellect. No less a person than Benjamin Franklin, the famous scientist, says, if passion drives you, let reason hold the rein. Please see that. If passion drives you, let reason hold the reins. So you need to use the reason to hold the reins and control the personality, just like the chariot metaphor in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna holds the horses, keeps it in check. Similarly, you've got to hold the mind to keep it in check. Do you all realize that Shakespeare was not a graduate of any university? Einstein was not a graduate of any university. But today, if you have to graduate from any university, you have to study Shakespeare. You have to study Einstein. So where did they get the knowledge from? Shakespeare did not study Shakespeare. Einstein did not study Einstein. So where did they get everything from? They got it from within. And that's the intellect. Intellect comes from within. And that's why Mark Twain puts it humorously. He says, I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. Mark Twain is known for his wit. He says, I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. So true education is to build the intellect. So once you have an intellect, then you will be able to manage your life. Self-management is self-motivation. You can manage yourself, you can manage anything else in the world. John Milton, the famous English poet, says, the mind in you can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell. Heaven or hell are not external places. It is internal. It's your own mind can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell. And that comes through self-management. So self-management is self-motivation. So to conclude, friends, what we need to motivate ourselves constantly, like I said, now we have the virus, but soon there won't be a virus. So what you need to motivate yourself is challenges. If there is challenge, then you will be motivated. But the problem is we run away from challenges. We don't like challenges. But if you strengthen your intellect, then you will look forward to challenges. You will have this capacity to face the challenges. You know, when the child is born, what the child learns in the first 2 years or the first 5 years of its life is 60% of it, what it learns in its entire life. As much as 60% of what we learn in life, we learn in the first 5 years of our life. Why? Because everything is a challenge for us. Seeing is a challenge. You know, what is the first challenge we have when we are born? Breathing. When we come out, first thing we do is we are gasping for breath. And that's what motivates us, just to get breathing. And then we grow up. Then we need to learn everything. And that's where you're motivated. But then you get into a phase of life where you become complacent. You believe I know everything. So that complacency destroys the motivation. So you keep challenges for yourself. You keep goals for yourself. And those goals, those challenges will keep pushing you, will keep you motivated. Kites fly highest against the wind, not with the wind. Kites, they can fly high. How do they fly high? That's what Churchill says. It rises highest against the wind, not with it. So when there is challenge, the kites rise high up. And that's the principle of growth. That's the principle of development we should follow. So what is self-development? What is self-management? Is to face life challenges, not to run away from it. And if you are blessed with the intellect, if you develop the intellect, it keeps you on track right through. So this entire knowledge of Vedanta is designed to help us develop the intellect. And intellect cannot be given by books, cannot be given by teachers. You've got to develop it yourself. It requires self-effort. So this knowledge, these books that Swamiji has written, the e-learning course, the weekly classes that we are doing, all these are helping you to strengthen the intellect. In fact, as parents, what is the best duty we can do for our children is to make them self-sufficient with the intellect. If you give them the intellect, they're self-sufficient. They don't need you. The government's, the best duty they can do to the citizens is to give the intellect. But we are all doing anything else except that. We are so busy, we are so preoccupied with what? We have no time for our intellects or others' intellects. And we got to realign our lives. You realign your lives, then you find that you will be on track and you will be able to set everybody else on track. So friends, after this talk, I'll be starting a new class just for newcomers. And this new class will start from next Sunday. And then those who have the ability can please come. You're all welcome. And you will be able to follow that. And details of that will be given after the Q&A session. So because this knowledge is so vast and these principles are not easy to understand, we thought that we'll keep a Q&A session so that more of these aspects we'll be able to clarify. And many of you all have been sending the questions. It's been coming thick and fast. And I thought I'll give a bit more time to clarify the questions. So we'll have about 10 minutes or 15 minutes of questions as Shehzad had promised. And then after that, please stay a while because we'll have a few announcements, brief but important announcements will be given at the end. So stay a while till we finish the whole thing. So you'll know exactly what to do as a follow-up to this lecture. So as far as the talk is concerned, I've just finished the talk, but I'm going to start answering the questions. You all may not be able to see the questions. It's only come on the chat. So the first question somebody is asked is, so what should the purpose of our lives be? See, the purpose of life is to find out yourself, to find out who you are. And you start with your mind and intellect. So first, find out what your mind and intellect is. And then once you are set on the mind and intellect, then you can go deeper into your personality and discover the self within. So we are made up of the outer personality, inner personality, and the real personality. Outer personality is the physical body, inner personality is the mind and intellect, and beyond the inner and the outer personality is the self, which is referred to as the Atman, the God principle within. So if you focus within and you start learning who you are, you ultimately discover the true purpose in life. The next question is, how does one develop? How does one grow one's intellect? The way to develop the intellect is through questioning, through thinking. When we were young, everyone has a natural tendency to question, but as you age, you lose that art of questioning. So you've got to keep that power of questioning alive. See, developing the intellect is exactly the same as developing your physical body. When you develop the physical body, how do you develop the physical body? Is by right nutrition, and second is by exercises. When you give the right nutrition and the right exercises, you strengthen the body, you develop the body. Similarly, to develop the intellect, you need the food for thought, the right knowledge, which is Vedantic knowledge. And you've got to exercise, question, think. Meditation or yoga will not help to develop the intellect. Meditation or yoga is like massage for the body. It just relieves your stress temporarily, that's all. Just by massaging the body, you can't strengthen the body. Similarly, you need to question, you need to think, use your intellect, and then you can develop your intellect. See, every one of us have got some intellect. You've got to use that. Remember this statement. The way to more light is the faithful use of what you have. The way to more light is the faithful use of what you have. Use your intellect, think more, you'll develop more. It's like muscles. You use your existing muscles, you'll develop more muscles. So get into that habit, rediscover that habit of questioning everything. Why do I have to go to the pub to feel good? Why can't I feel good without going to the pub? I'm not saying we should not go to the pub, but you got to question. Why do I have to go to the holiday to get there? Why do I need a weekend to feel good? Why can't I feel good without a weekend? So problem is, since we are not thinking for ourselves, we are not questioning, we are following the herd mechanically. So mechanically, if you follow the herd, then you will only suffer whatever the herd is suffering. Whatever happens to others will happen to you. So you've got to think for yourself carefully, and then you find that whole thing opens up. The next question is, what if you choose an achievement and it is unreasonable for you? What if you choose an achievement and it is unreasonable for you? See, when you fix a goal, your intellect should fix the goal. If your intellect fixes the goal, then it will take into account your capacity. But if you fix a goal without thinking, without the intellect, then you're fixing it beyond your capacity. Then it is unreachable. So fixing the goal, fixing the ideal has to be done with the intellect. Next question. As humans, our core nature is survival. And therefore, how do you think about others and work collaboratively over yourself? I'm repeating the question for those who didn't get it. As humans, our core nature is survival. And therefore, how to collaborate and cooperate with others? The core nature of a human being is not survival. The core nature of animals is survival. A core nature of a human being is to give, is to serve, is to sacrifice, which other creatures cannot do that. So it's only a human being who can serve, who can help others. And interestingly, when you serve, when you help others, you become more peaceful. And that's what we were analyzing in the talk. You become more dynamic, you become more energetic. And that energy comes when you serve, when you give, when you help. You find that in children. When children give, they smile. When children take, they frown. You'll see that, when the children are playing, if one child says, I want that, please give me what you have. And the other child says, no, this is mine. This is mine. Immediately there's a frown. But if the child says, okay, take it, there's a smile. And that's exactly what happens in us mentally. That spirit of giving gives a smile in us. Spirit of taking, we frown. Remember that statement which Charles Dickens says, the far, far better thing I do than I've ever done before. When you give, when you serve, you find is the noblest thing to do. Next question. Often one is motivated, but how does one deal with the challenge of procrastination, which is often as a result of fear of failure at previous challenges? I repeat, often one is motivated, but how does one deal with the challenge of procrastination? Procrastination comes from the mind. See, everyone has got three natures. It's called as tamas, rajas, and sattva. We'll be discussing all these in the weekly classes. I'm just giving it to you as a sample in the little time that we have. The three natures of human beings are called as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is the highest nature, which is to be detached, calm, and composed. Rajas is to be anxious and agitated. Tamas is to be lazy. So procrastination, what you're asking, comes from the lowest quality, which is tamas. It's your tamasic nature which makes you lazy, which makes you procrastinate. And that is an aspect of the mind. So when the mind takes over, then you procrastinate, you delay everything. But if the intellect were to be in charge, there's no procrastination. What you have to do today, you do it tomorrow. What you have to do tomorrow, you do it today. That is how the intellect functions. Mind says, what I have to do today, I will do it next week. Procrastinate, delay. So motivation comes when the intellect directs your actions. Then there is no problem of procrastination. Next question. How much time in our busy schedule should we keep aside for the practice of Vedanta? How much time in a busy schedule should we keep aside for the practice of Vedanta? It depends on each person. But to start off, you need to treat Vedanta as a gym for your mind. For some of you, that may be a wrong example because you will say, I never go to the gym. I never exercise. Then in that case, you better start doing that also. So the knowledge of Vedanta is like gym for your mind. You need to use this to motivate yourself, to develop the inner personality. So you fix for yourself in your schedule what time. Ideally, we would suggest first thing in the morning when your mind is fresh. If you study Vedanta, then your progress will be very good. And to help you, you can use all the different material that we have, which you can find it on our website, different resources, you can use it. But ultimately, you've got to put in that effort. So it's up to you how much time you want to give. More time you give, the more you will benefit. But also make sure that you don't cut down on your other obligations. Keep a balance. Study this, learn this knowledge, but also keep a balance and attend to your other duties. And the next question is, we must never give up something we have been listening everywhere. But if you're delusional, you must give up because you're doing nothing but wasting your time. So my question here is, how do you know that you're delusional or not? How do you know that you're delusional or not? Problem is you don't know. A person who is delusional does not know that he or she is deluded. That is a problem. A person who's drunk does not know he is drunk. It's only next morning he says, oh, I was drunk last evening. To the extent you're sober, you know you're drunk. If you're fully sloshed, you don't know that you're drunk. Similarly, if you're fully delusional, you don't know you're delusional. You need a little intellect to understand that you don't have an intellect. So how do you know that you don't have an intellect? You have to develop the intellect. When you develop the intellect, you know that I don't have intellect. Next question. How do you motivate despite having acute disturbance of severe health pains? See, as long as you have a physical body, everyone goes through disease and decay. The body will decay, the body will disease, ultimately death. It's a natural process every one of us have to go through. So when you have physical ailments, you understand that's the nature of the body. You try and see what best you can do to sort out that. What can be cured, try and cure. What cannot be cured, you have to endure. What can be cured, you should try and cure. What cannot be cured, you should endure. And accept it as a part of your life and adjust your life accordingly. How can I have faith in these teachings? See, you can have faith in these teachings when you start practicing it, when you start applying it. So start applying a little bit of this knowledge. And as you apply this knowledge little by little, you'll get more confidence in it. So you've got to experience it yourself and be confident. Think for yourself and decide, and then you will be able to take it up further. Any practical ideas for reducing procrastination, please? That's one of the reasons why we get married. Any practical ideas for reducing procrastination? If you are married, you know your spouse is there to remind you where you're going wrong. For those who are married, use the spouses. For those who are not married, get married. So how do you reduce your procrastination? Again, use the intellect. If you use the intellect, you will not fall into that.